Good morning, and thank you, Jason, for having us. As Jason said, we're from the Rhode Island School of Design, the Department of Interior Architecture, where we focus primarily on adaptive reuse. And so we don't gather data, and we are here today to discuss how the wonderful technology that is discussed in this room today is part of a paradigm shift in academia, especially those of us who focus on heritage through activating this data. There have been few buildings built all at one time, or so built that have not undergone some considerable modifications, either by additions, transformations, or partial changes. These are the 1875 words of architect and theoretician Eugène Viollet-le-Duc. Today, building documentation, the record of a structure, quote, as built, is a prerequisite of the practice of adding to and subtracting from an existing structure. The lack of such knowledge in the late 19th century of a building's changes over time was at the crux of the debates on the practice of restoration. The key participants of those debates founded their arguments upon the dearth of available building documentation in the mid-19th century. 1.5 centuries later, enabled by advancement in digital technology, the possibilities for building documentation are vast. There is access to building information and data never imaginable, both intangible and tangible. The use of this data for building documentation, however, remains that of recording constructed form, albeit in novel formats. At the brink of a new era in information and data collection, the potential of such data has yet to be fully realized. The impassioned arguments of the mid-19th century, though couched in the rhetoric of a different time, still resonate with a keen relevance today and offer insight to the untapped potential of data in the age of digital technology. Today, my colleagues and I will discuss this potential through going backwards and then focusing on what we're doing now at RISD, and then what it could mean in the future. To restore a building is not to preserve it, to repair it or rebuild it. It is to reinstate it in a condition of completeness that could never have existed at any given time. These are the now infamous words of Viollet-le-Duc that unleashed the fierce oratory of the burgeoning conservation movement. Those words were the product of a long process with roots in the damage inflicted by the French Revolution on many heritage structures in France. It resulted in the creation in 1830 of the post of Inspector General of Historic Monuments in France to assess such damage. In 1840, the commission under Prosper Mérimée issued a first list of 935 classified monuments in need of repair, a list that grew to 3,000 buildings just 9 years later. Viollet-le-Duc was appointed for the restoration of many of these monuments, including the Roman city of Carcassonne. It is in the context of this body of work that Viollet-le-Duc defined the term restoration, a definition derived from his years of experience with damaged monuments and the all-consuming issue arising from working with existing structures without documentation. That is, the merits of, quote, the principle that every building and every part of a building should be restored in its own style, not only as regards appearance, but structure, close quote. His controversial definition of restoration was his solution to this complex issue. In response, William Morris, the founder of the Society for the Protection of Ancient Buildings, equated such restoration with, quote, a kind of forgery that was impossible because knowledge failed the builders, close quote. He believed that those engaged in restoration, quote, to bring back a building to the best time of its history, hath no guide but each his own individual whim to point out to them what is admirable and what is contemptible, close quote. His objections were premised on a reliance on conjecture in the absence of information from building documentation. In the 19th century, there were, of course, measured drawings, surveyed drawings, and architectural drawings in the forms of plans, sections, and elevations. They were all found within architectural publications. These included recent works from the 18th century, as well as reprints or new translations of earlier works, such as Serlio, Alberti, Colin Campbell's Vitruvius Britannicus, William Kent's 1727 designs of Inigo Jones, and of course Stuart and Rivette's 1762 The Antiquities of Athens. These resources focus primarily on documenting architecture, often of antiquity, as measured plans, sections, elevations, and details. In the 1840s, when Viollet-le-Duc received his first restoration commissions, existing documentation for monuments damaged by the French Revolution did not exist. As he himself noted, the term restoration and the thing itself are modern. The tools and the know-how for building documentation existed as the surveyor's compass, a half chain, and perhaps a solar compass. The process of using these tools would have been labor and time intensive, although from what we're hearing this morning, it's no less time intensive, rendering building documentation a rare commodity. It was only through the information gathered by Viollet-le-Duc and others who worked on the first survey of historic monuments listed in 1840 that documentation of those French monuments came into being. Building documentation of heritage, such as Vézelay, Viollet-le-Duc's first project, for example, was only undertaken by De Heel and von Bezout in the late 19th century, more than 30 years after Viollet-le-Duc's interventions. Today, these records are now part of the Base Marimé, a database of the French Ministry of Culture. Through this site, one can access information regarding monuments of historic significance. These types of building documentation are in the form of still images of building geometry. These fixed views, similar to those of the monuments of antiquity, captured as line a set of existing architectural conditions. This was the missing knowledge that Morris alluded to in 1877 as necessary for understanding and undertaking restorative work of any kind. Today, the hand tools of the 19th century are superseded by digital ones. In the 21st century, a wealth of imaging tools that utilize new technologies have replaced the surveying compasses and the half chain. These tools are based on different forms of light, such as thermography and lasers, to collect information of objects and buildings. As you all know, 3D laser scans capture building information from which floor plans, elevations, and sections of a building can be extracted, and allow for the creation of interactive scale models of space. With accuracy and speed, and without the errors of physical measuring and surveying, these tools readily produce simple building documentation for all structures. Further, these tools extend the possibility of data previously imperceptible to the human eye. Thermal imaging, for example, allows one to view other wavelengths, such as ultraviolet or infrared light. Applied to buildings, this technology, for example, enables the capture of the heat of a building as image, resulting in information regarding water or moisture infiltration as visible data. Such tools provide knowledge beyond what Morris could have imagined possible, allowing for the collection of near-perfect data for documenting existing structures, but also for building diagnostics. Such a combination of data would most definitely have allowed for the differentiation of the parts of a heritage building and the methods and styles of their construction. Such data would have permitted Viollet-le-Duc to fulfill his wishes without conjecture. Readers of Viollet-le-Duc focus on his audacious description of the completeness that could never have existed at any given time. Yet, after his first polarizing lines, Viollet-le-Duc's daring is matched with an often overlooked prescience. He instead elaborated on the responsibility of the architect in working with heritage, quote, "It is in these circumstances, which frequently present themselves, that the intelligence of the architect is called into play. He always possesses the means of reconciling his role as restorer with that of artist commissioned to meet unforeseen requirements." Close quote. With these words, he addresses The role of the architect is not only the designer of structures, but also one with foresight to predict and plan for a future that perhaps has not yet arrived. It is this role of the architect as a far-seeing individual that offers new possibilities for the use of today's tools, one that exceed that of building documentation. In this era of climate change, Viollet-le-Duc's unforeseen requirements are particularly relevant with changes of temperature, plate tectonics, ice volume, sea level, vegetation, etc. Directly wielding impact on many aspects of life, including our built heritage, these changes are not immediately visible, or not immediate or immediately visible. They take place over time in small but steady increments that in sum total result in dramatic and even catastrophic proportions. In a society engrossed with images, how does one recognize, no less plan for future change without being able to visualize such possibilities?
Hello, everybody. To conclude with this presentation, I think I want to just kind of repeat what my colleague said in the very beginning. Our department, the Department of Interior Architecture at the Rhode Island School of Design, we don't do architecture, we don't do interior design. What we focus on is working with existing spaces, buildings, and structures, and through interventions, prolong them, give them new meaning, give them new life, and continuation. In such an effort, our students we have students graduate with a Masters of Art in Adaptive Reuse and with the Masters of Design in Interior Studies for focus on adaptive reuse. And we have been working with Newport, Rhode Island, for about 6 years. In this kind of collaboration with a major funding organization there, we kind of took an intimate kind of look at Newport, and the question of the funding agency was really kind of how to kind of bring change into a city that is steeped in its history. So Newport, as one of these original founding colonies, the many issues of American historic buildings and cities today are embodied in the structures, in infrastructure of this 370-year-old kind of city. Newport is uniquely endowed with a wealth of protected heritage buildings from Fort Adams that we kind of looked at 2 years ago, to the mansions and to the murals and stained glass of the John Lafarge at the Newport Congregational Church that we worked on with our students 3 years ago. The desire to stand still in time here is perhaps simply an innate part of the human condition, and in such an abundance of historic structures. The resistance to change is further enforced by events such as the recent letter from the actor Robert Redford, referencing his time filming in Newport both in the 70s and very recently. A statement, quote, "I was pleasantly surprised that some 40 years later, the city looks and feels almost exactly as it did when I first came here. I commend the community for the vision and care demonstrated to ensure for the preservation of its historical and cultural significant properties." In these 40 years, preservation as a discipline has certainly been an advocate for care, but also has accepted the need to evolve. In Newport, however, even the small proposal of change steep in the reality of its context and its habitants can be viewed as a threat. It is the spirit of evolving, however, that the students and our funding organization will focus on the reuse of existing structures in the city. So through this collaboration sponsorship from the Van Buren Charitable Foundation and in this latest recent kind of project with the Newport Restoration Foundation, our students undertake to project change, literally and figuratively, onto Easton's Point. Easton Point a 17th century neighborhood along the western shoreline of the Aquatonic Island. The project, so these were the future studio, the past studios that we have conducted with our students in Newport, with the Congregational Church, with Fort Adams, with an old church, now kind of a museum and art movie, and the Point neighborhood as a general study. So that's how the Point neighborhood that our current kind of projects kind of works at. And this was a brochure done keeping 74 Bridge Street above water, keeping history above water, is from the current second kind of agency that we're working with, the Newport Restoration Fund. So expanding on the work from Bridge Street in the Point neighborhood, and that symposium they held, our project, our co-sponsor, we focus on the issue of preservation in historic neighborhoods that are seriously threatened by rising sea level water rise. The students will conduct investigations through the new use of new data acquisition technology together with state-of-art visualization and processing technology. So this is where we kind of try to bring together the capturing of data, the processing of data, producing ideas with the data, and then kind of communicating with the data. The objective in using these digital tools with virtual building models engage the general public, at times skeptical and inured to the dangers of climate change for waterfront heritage. Here you see a picture by the inventor Traugott Bleek, and similar to this idea, the projecting change as a studio and seminar provides the opportunity for the students to explore principles and theories, such as those we heard from my colleague Lillian Wong of Violet Leduc and William Morris, and contemporary thoughts on climate change and future life as we kind of imagine it by society. This exploration kind of takes the form of processing collected data into a creative form of interventions, and then further visualizing these interventions into new media. This was the first kind of part that the students kind of an assignment kind of looked at, is a very old form of digitalizing something in some way of flipbooks, where they kind of looked at kind of what has changed. Newporters believe that whatever they see is has always been like that, has never changed, and therefore we kind of try to look at different forms of our neighborhood, and students kind of through the flipbooks simply kind of communicated kind of that form of change. Similar in this kind of coastline visualization, where the students kind of took data from old maps to current maps and kind of animated that. So the process began by analyzing and documenting written, recorded historical records and the historic houses and their location, their construction, their geometry and textures, their people and the neighborhoods. These materials were augmented by the existing data on infrastructure and scientific forecasts. Here we kind of looked at central climate data of how sea level would kind of overtake everything. And our project site is this street. By 1 degree global warming, kind of the occurrence on conservative kind of data. That's also kind of another way of looking at the same data, kind of extreme carbon cuts, and with some other governments that we may engage with unchecked pollution. In the end, we got an expert from Rhode Island Coastal Management, and we kind of worked basically with this data, 13 feet of sea level rise, including kind of high tide by 2100, and other experts that we invited kind of challenged that and kind of said that would be much more. So how do we engage a neighborhood, a historic neighborhood, in terms of preservation when we know that the sea level water rise of that neighborhood will be so drastic that there is kind of no way of protecting the actual objects on their self. So through a thorough understanding by both existing issues and future projections provided a basis for extensive experimentation, imaginative design possibilities, and creative interventions in this historical context. So students kind of tried with a matrix to kind of look at different forms that we have seen so far, retreat, accommodate, and to protect. They are mostly kind of seen by individual kind of forms of ownership. With objective to explore relationship between heritage and environmental forms of preservation, between past, contemporary, and possible future forms of living and design, we hope the students will understand the larger issues of climate change and its potential impact in developing ideas, systems, and design interventions that will allow this neighborhood and possibly others to evolve further in the future. So one project that basically takes into account the idea by Emma Martens that from 1750 on we have 36% more carbon dioxide in the air. This date is very important because 1750 this neighborhood was kind of started to be developed by kind of creating kind of the basic grid of its streets. That has never changed from back then, but our time has very much changed, just looking at very basic data. And this student group who look at this project and kind of saying, okay, we have to start now by doing something, kind of let's take this 20th century and 19th century of gray streets away and kind of let's create green streets for the immediate future, and then there will become blue streets in the future. Another group took on the idea that the social, the naturally and carefully investigating points of commonalities and points of differentiations rather than leveling all. What they're saying is, instead of kind of trying to kind of grab on to kind of old values where we kind of differentiate between what is human, what is nature, what is culture, what are the values, we kind of analyze that and kind of create a different form of living together. A third group took on the saying, the quote by Stephen Jay Gould from 1990, "Nature does not exist for us, had no idea we are coming, and doesn't give a damn about us." What they are looking at is having a gradual change, trying not to fight the forces of water, but kind of work with them, and basically open up while kind of allowing the buildings then to float and slowly with the sea level rise adjust to them. And a fourth group that I want to talk about is a group that kind of decided pure memory or remembrance is in the past and separated from the body. A quote by the philosopher Henry Bergson. And what the students basically kind of decided is a kind of, with slow sea level rise, they will just leave the existing historic objects, the buildings there, but will start casting them with concrete around them until a level where the sea level rise is so high that they will remove the houses and create kind of and leave traces over. Traces of memory of the existing past buildings, but not just traces of memory. They, I think, also kind of create kind of a physical digital trace. There's a physical geometrical trace that they leave behind of what one could see in a big 3D scan, but they are in kind of shaped in concrete. And I will ask my colleague Michael to talk about the fifth project, which is an entire digital project.
Thank you. So I think the last examples of our students' projects make it obvious that the change we are talking about here in Newport, 13 feet of sea level rise endangering an entire historical neighborhood, is drastic, and the ideas of our students may seem the same. So when we conceptualized this project, we were thinking about how could we activate the data in the sense of the projections of the historical data, and in the context of the ideas our students would develop in order to protect the built heritage in a way that would speak to the people that are actually affected, the residents in Newport, the various foundations that work in preservation over there, and also those thousands and thousands of people who come to visit Newport because they feel attached to the stories of the place. So just those people, lay people, mostly. And we believe that spatial computing, of which laser scanning is obviously a part, is a medium that can also be interpreted creatively. And one student said that it would allow us to walk upright in the digital future again, not bent over our tools. So it's not just a transformation in posture that we are talking about. It is on a larger scale, it is a transformation on a society level. If we look at a few past technological transformations, we can easily determine that there was a huge transformative potential, like when we stopped putting punch cards into computers and had actual keyboards, when they became connected through the internet, when we were finally able to unplug them and have the internet mobile and social platforms emerged. Each time that happened, it also meant a lot to our work as, I think, historians, as architects, as designers, as scientists. And now, through spatial computing, we see a fourth transformation emerging. It will be driven by, at least if we look at the considerable investments and technological developments that are currently going on, by augmented reality, virtual reality, which are believed to eventually merge into merged realities. And also another big quest of humanity currently, that is artificial intelligence. So looking at the players in that market and the investments that are going into it, we see on the one side enormous investments in the technical equipment and in software, but it is also clear that AR, VR, all of that requires content, and this is where we see possibilities for our future students and the current students and the younger generation to not just be passengers in that transformation, but also shape it and give it a face, so to say. But so currently, when we communicate design and building related data. If it's not point cloud, which I think in the raw form is even harder to understand, that plans, but talking with lay people, we cannot always assume that they have a concept of two parallel lines, meaning walls or ceilings in certain circumstances, or the landings of a staircase. The same with models. If you do not possess a concept of scale, a model is just a small object. And architectural diagrams bring about similar challenges, discussing with a wider public normally. So what this means is that people need special knowledge to understand these. As specialists, we tend to forget that, but as soon as we talk with lay people, we realize that. So I now pick up on Mark Steiß's talk. These are the methods our students are exploring now to bridge these gaps of specialist knowledge and bring their concepts closer to the people in Newport. Augmented reality via content that runs on mobile devices that people bring. 3D stereoscopic video, which again runs on mobile devices people will bring, and we are going to hand out hundreds of Google Cardboards that will then function as head-mounted displays, and we will also have a few HTC Vive VR stations where students create content in Unity, which is a gaming environment some of you may know. So we started doing that by experimenting and by inviting some experts to obtain feedback. Like it's not just the design ideas and the technology, it's also observing people how they interact with it, how easy they find it, and what kind of feedback they provide. This is helping our students to fine-tune the experiences they are now developing. So it is an ongoing process, it's not finished. We are going to present the works at the end of May in Newport for the first time. This is also one of the experiments, which is not working as an experiment. Anyway, when you walk the streets of a historical site, such as Newport or the Forum Romanum or the Agora of Athens, you find yourself in narrative environments, and stories are believed to be among our original methods of conveying information from one human being to the next. So keeping that in mind, our students are trying to develop a narrative for the AR, VR, and 360 video experiences, and these are some examples. They are identifying spots on the actual historical site, then determine a geometrical relationship of the virtual content and the actual viewing position, and then via a marker that provides the tracking for the overlaid virtual content with the real content. They will have several spots on site where the audience can view the change and the rising sea levels in one-on-one scale. Another group is working on 360 video. They are going to do, what's this movie called where one man always wakes up on the same day? Groundhog Day. So this is a variation of Groundhog Day. You are waking up in your VR in one of the historical houses in Newport. It is Groundhog Day, but you do not know it. And you do a typical thing in the morning. You walk through the kitchen, open the door, and pick up the newspaper. And in the first movie, everything is as it is, as Bridge Street is, as it would be to wake up in one of these historical houses. in the next scene, the house is still there. You wake up in the same environment, so it is preserved, but you hear noises that seem unfamiliar, and as you open the door, your house was picked up by a drone and taken away to be protected from the rising sea levels. And in the third scene, you again wake up in the house and it's all fine. You go pick up the newspaper, and outside there's suddenly a garden. There's flowers and trees, but it is 300 feet above the sea because the house was taken there to be kept safe. And they're also trying to do that as an interactive experience, allowing people to make those decisions to save the built heritage. Another group is working on an interactive experience that is basically a walkthrough of the historical neighborhood, but it has time portals in it. So you can walk into the future and see the sea level rise, potential interventions. You can also walk back in time and see all the changes this neighborhood has undergone in its more than 300 years of existence. And finally, there is a group which works on an augmented reality game that brings an important aspect of preservation. We also believe in this, in the way we activate data, in the way we bring knowledge and ideas related to spaces together. And that is a game that allows you to try save the neighborhood from the rising sea levels as an individual player, as a group of neighbors, and as a powerful policy maker. Or so it has educative aspects in the sense of telling the people what they can do on an individual level, where they would have to join in order to protect their heritage, and where they would actually have to talk to people they elected to help them. And part of the game is, I think, a direct line to some politicians. So when we activate data with our students, it is data we derive obviously through surveying, observation, and evaluation, but also data we devise through imagination, design, and planning. And we try to activate it beyond the medium in society. Thank you.